It's the final word. Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon back for a weekly show after a couple that we've taken off due to the T20 World Cup, which has been run and won. We will talk about Australia's victory in a little bit, although not too much. We did that on the Daily Show, Jeff, back on Sunday. Thanks to everybody who listened and watched those over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks. We have Taha Hashim and Nikesh Shrigani joining us today for a long conversation about the Azim Rafiq saga, but an awful lot more too about institutional racism in cricket in this country and beyond. We have a bit to talk about around what we're doing with our live shows, Jeff, which I can announce off the top today. But before doing any of that, hello, Jeff, and look what I've got. I'm going to say down the Zoom screen. I didn't show you this before we started. I'll put it to the camera as well because we are on YouTube. Check this out. This is the Brazil playing kit. We have been both sent kindly by Matt and by Roberta the playing shirt and the cap of the Brazil women's national team, which I will wear proudly. So I'm going to pack one of those, or a shirt and a hat, in my suitcase to bring back to you, Jeff, when I depart for Australia in 3 days. Hello.
Well, pack 2 of them, I hope, because then we can wear them together.
Yes.
And fully realise our destiny to be as embarrassing as possible. If Winnie were a bit older, we could do it with her in public. Just to
she's got that, hasn't she? We received for her. A baby Bangladesh top. Not a baby Bangladesh top,
the smallest possible.
Yeah, sent through a small top Bangladesh for her. So we can all wear green together at some point, but Brazil for you and me.
Brian Withington was very, very sharp with that purchase. It was an investment in the future.
And a good one at that. I see that Brazil are one of many countries who have been awarded global tournaments in the last 24 hours or so. Jeff, let's start there. We have seen the entire ICC men's calendar from 2024 to 2031 announced. And if you fold in the 2023 Men's World Cup next year, that means India cash into the tune of 4 tournaments in 8 years and 5 in 10 if you count the World T20 they've just hosted, albeit in the UAE. They've done very well, but the main news story, I suppose, was that the United States of America, alongside the West Indies, are hosting the Men's T20 World Cup in 2024.
5 in 10 years. Yep, they definitely needed that. India. It's all about the co-hosts, because that's how the ICC have made it look like this is a bit more democratic. Oh, West Indies and the USA. There'll be 3 games probably in Fort Lauderdale or whatever it's called. The 2026 T20 competition will be India and Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka will get like 3 games in Gaul or something. Bangladesh get a co-hosting gig, couple of games in Dhaka. It's a bit of a whitewash, this, isn't it? The only real change from the England, Australia, India get all the tournaments is that South Africa will get the major 50-over World Cup in 2027, to be shared with Namibia and Zimbabwe. But yeah, the rest of it's just been a little bit cheekily spread around. 2030, it'll be England and Ireland and Scotland. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be heaps of games in Dublin. I mean, they're predictable, aren't they? And they've junked off the one-day Super League that meant that some of the bigger teams had to play some of the smaller teams because, we don't really need that anymore. We tried that for a couple of years, no good.
Yeah, this was slipped in there. So, I mean, obviously we celebrate the fact that the World Cup returns to 14 teams in 2027. No concerns with that, but that's the justification to get rid of the 13-team Super League. And yes, it is true to say the Super League did underpin the qualifying schedule for a 10-team World Cup. That is accurate. No questions there. However, it also gave men's one-day cricket some structure in the way that women's one-day cricket has had some structure over the last 6 years. And it also meant that, frankly, they had no choice but to play teams they wouldn't otherwise play. The very fact that England have to go and play 3 one-day internationals in Holland next year, for instance, there are many examples like that of series that would have never have gone ahead and can only be helpful to nations who made the 13 but aren't getting loads of opportunities against the bigger nations. Holland's a good example this time, but the level below it that had the USA in it, for example, able to play consistent one-day international cricket for the first time. Presumably that entire structure gets junked in favour of the top 10 teams qualifying and the next 4 having a qualifying tournament. In other words, basically what we're getting with the men's T20 at the moment. So they'll get 2 weeks of concentrated cricket in a qualifier, but that's nothing compared to 4 years or 3 years at the very least of round-robin cricket, when they might get a chance to play away in India or home in Australia or against Australia or whatever it is, countries that usually would ignore them.
Yeah, that's the fundamentals. But the larger teams don't want to play those other teams. So this is a handy way of not doing that. You can't say they're not consistent, the ICC. If anything, they're not consistent. Every second World Cup will be in India. There'll be 250 over World Cups in the space of 8 years in India, 2023 and 2031. I mean, why not? Go where the money is. Get it in a big pile, and then you can all roll in the pile, and then you get the smell of money all over you, and then you can go rub up against other people because you smell of money and be like, yeah, waft it, give it a whiff.
Yeah, it's an aphrodisiac, I suppose. But yeah, remember, the ICC are always, those who work for the ICC are always quick to remind us that they are a member-based organisation. They work for the members, and sure enough, this was a recommendation from the Chief Executives Committee, I think it was, which has 12 CEOs on there from the full member nations, who really boils down to what's the will of the room and what's the will of India, and occasionally the will of India, Australia and England, depending on how they're feeling at the time. So yes, 4 of the tournaments in the next 8 years from 2023 will be in India. Surprise, surprise. Jeff, I said we've got live shows to announce. Let's get straight to that. We have been busy behind the scenes, and we have locked in Melbourne on the 13th of December at the Mission to Seafarers, where we were in 2019. We have locked on the 14th of December, the Uni Bar in Adelaide for our second Adelaide live show. We did one of those 2 years ago as well. And we haven't quite locked in, but we've nearly locked in Sydney on the 4th of January. So we're not going to start selling tickets to that as yet. But in the show notes, you will see 2 different links for 2 different shows, as is the custom. The Melbourne on the 13th of December, and we jump on the plane on the 14th, and we'll arrive in Adelaide for that show the following evening. And, they've all been sellouts so far. I expect this will be as well. Can't wait to have you all along. Can't wait to get you to the Seafarers.
I can't wait to have people being allowed to be in the same room, because apparently that will happen in Melbourne before the time of the show. We're relying on that happening. Obviously, if something goes desperately awry, then we'll work out ways to give everyone their cash back. But it should happen, and there'll be us in a room where seafarers are normally in the room. There'll be a big ship's bell that we may or may not ring. And there will be good times had. We're working out what the show exactly is going to look like. A hot tip for you, if you're listening, if you haven't joined the Patreon, now's a good time, because you get a discount on your tickets. So why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? It's the best time. Now's the best time.
Yeah,
join up. You can probably win a slab, and you can get a discount on your tickets.
That's right. And speaking of slabs, Brick Lane are going to be very much part of what we're doing in these live shows. But yeah, it's like when we had our virtual live shows during lockdown with Damien Fleming and Stuart McGill. We are offering a third discount to our patrons, so that'll all be specified in the ticket link and in the show notes. But yeah, if you're not a patron already and you get on board now, you'll have access to that code, and away we go. And if you're not, that's cool too. We'd love to have you. I think the last time, and in fact, the first time I went to the Seafarers, Jeff, you were performing there. This was in 2014. You were doing some spoken word presentations that night, and I remember it fondly. So there's the early days of when you and I would see each other in the pub before we were working with each other. And then in 2019, it was like our homecoming show, wasn't it? After the 19 World Cup and Ashes, we went there before the Test series between Australia and Pakistan, if memory serves me correctly. Brad Hodge was with us that night. We did the Ballad of Sean Marsh that night in full. And then in Adelaide 2019, the following week, we did Jim Maxwell telling filthy stories. We did Jason Gillespie telling his tale of life in cricket. and that was an absolute beauty as well at the Ambassadors. But we are going to go to it's called Unibar. It's on the banks of the River Torrens across the road from Adelaide Oval. So it's a nice test match location a couple of days before the test starts between Australia and England. So what we've tried to do is place both of these shows between the Brisbane test, which no one's going to anyway because we're locked out of Queensland. So that'll be the night after the Brisbane test finishes, and then 2 days before the Adelaide test match starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I will be in Brisbane, but I can't do a live show on my own. But, if people just want to come down to the house that I'm doing home quarantine in and, I'll just do a show for you over the fence or something. Give me something to do while I'm locked up in there.
All right, so bring your mates, get involved, even if they're not necessarily part of what we've done on the Final Word before. Remember, Jeff, in London in 19 at the Hampstead Cricket Club show, we had a bunch of blokes who, I don't know, like a friend of a friend of a friend told them to come to this cricket show. There was about 10 of them. They had the time of their lives, and they've all been Final Word listeners thereafter. And I think a couple of them are now patrons too. So in keeping with that spirit, bring everybody along. I mentioned that Brick Lane will be there in force, both in Melbourne and Adelaide. We have some good news that may or may not have been revealed off the top of the show. I'm not sure if it was part of Jay's intro this week, but we are giving away at the moment 200 4-packs of Brick Lane for free. And all you need to do, Jeff, is simply sign up to the Brick Lane mailing list, and you do that by going to bricklanebrewing.com/pages/the final word. That'll be in the show notes as well. So click that link, put your details in, get yourself on the mailing list, and if you're of the first 200 people to do that, there's a 4-pack coming your way.
And, they're nice people. They won't send you a million emails a day. I trust they're not the kind of list that would over email, because they're decent. They're from Melbourne. They're from Dandenong, out Adams Way. They're earthy. They're local. They use local produce. They employ local people. They try to look after the environment with what they do. They're an all-round good news brewery. And if you don't like drinking, you can drink their options that don't have any booze in them.
And what we're also going to do with Brick Lane, while we're on the topic of live shows, we haven't quite got this down pat yet, but one night during the Melbourne test match, we will work with Brick Lane to do, hopefully, the daily show from there. I wouldn't say to a studio audience necessarily, but you can come along and hang out with Jeff and me as we record it at Brick Lane, at Queen Victoria Market, and then we can all have a couple of beers and a bite to eat afterwards in there. So provided that all lines up with the schedule, we'll be endeavouring to do that. Probably not Boxing Day, but one of the days that follow, 27, 28, 29, something like that. So bricklanebrewing.com/pages/the final word to get yourself in the first 200. And there'll also be a 15% offer, Jeff, that we are rolling out again. We have Maxi 145 and loads of people got involved in that. That's going to be our December, let's call it Christmas offer. We haven't quite worked out what the code's going to be, but watch this space. We'll reveal all on the weekly show, hopefully, next week.
Well, since we're coming into an Ashes, I think it should be Sean Marsh 182. Can we do 18.2%? Can we? Let's see if we can negotiate Brick Lane up to 18.2.
I reckon that's quite. Is 182 what he made at Adelaide
in Hobart?
Last time, was it? Oh, at Hobart. Sorry.
Yeah.
Because we could. Go
I suppose
with
we
what
could do
he
his
made at
Ashes. That was 126, I think. So that's not as generous.
Yeah.
I think it's the ultimate Sean Marsh day was the 182.
Okay, well, let's commit to that. By that, I mean, let's ask Brick Lane permission, but they're usually very, very good about this. Good people doing good things. Speaking of the Ashes, Jeff, now the World Cup's over, we can focus on the real stuff. Said with tongue-in-cheek. The Ashes squad of 15 has been announced. Very different to how it was done, I suppose it was 11 years ago when they had that process of elimination when they named like 19 and evicted one person off the island each day.
Someone got pushed into the pool.
Yes, the Rob Guest was pushing people into the man-o-man pool, and they ended up with a squad of, I think, 14 for the first two tests there. Well, it's 15 this time. I'm still not entirely sure why they bother with these squads of 15 in the modern era. I mean, of course, if they want to pick someone up who's not in there, they'll fly them into the team. But anyway, it's a bit of a relic, but let's go with it. The first two test matches...
I guess because they have to quarantine to go to Brisbane, don't they? So whoever their players are, they have to be there for the 2 weeks of of quarantine, a week before they'll no longer have to do it anymore.
That is a very, very good point. I didn't even consider that. Yes, they will have to, because I'm not quarantining. I've kind of forgotten the fact that these players are being put into 2 weeks of completely unnecessary quarantine purely because CA is so bloody stubborn that they wouldn't have moved the Brisbane test to January when it obviously should be, to mean all the players coming home from the World Cup could spend 2 weeks with their families. But instead of letting players have 2 precious weeks with their families, let's lock them up in a hotel for 2 weeks back in Brisbane. What a good idea that is. Anyway, that's all been and done. For Australia, the news, well, at least I thought the news was no Nick Maddinson and no Mitchell Marsh. I thought, even though George Bailey was quite bullish around Marcus Harris playing the first test last week, in the back of my mind, I thought that was a bit of a bluff, and Maddo would have been like right there with him, given his extraordinary record for Victoria over the last couple of years, and it looked like Maddo was kind of cherry right to get another opportunity at test level. But Marcus Harris is going to play the first 2 tests, it looks like, and it'll be between Usman Khawaja and Travis Head for the number 5 spot.
Do you think they would actually play Khawaja at 5, or is he really there as top order insurance in case one of the top 3 falls over? And I mean, the way I would read it, Head's the incumbent-ish at 5, not quite, not exactly, but he's the one who they've tried to make work at number 5 for so long that it feels pretty obvious that that's who they'll go with, and Khawaja will be their backup.
I probably would have. I mean, I know I already mentioned Maddinson as the opener. I suppose that's because we know that Khawaja isn't going to open. They kind of already ruled that out. But if we were starting from a blank piece of paper, I'd have been tempted to have opened with Khawaja and played Head at 5 as the informed player in the country. But it looks as though they're playing for one spot. Green confirmed as number 6. In other words, Mitchell Marsh isn't there to apply pressure in the immediate term, although thinking this through rationally, if these Australia A players are also going to be part of the quarantine, I assume, because they're playing a game in Brisbane between 1 and 3 December. Then they're playing the game against England's Lions squad, also in Brisbane. So presumably that means that any of Sean Abbott, Ashton Agar, Scott Boland, Alex Carey, Henry Hunt, Josh Inglis, Nick Maddinson, Mitchell Marsh, Matt Renshaw back in town, Mark Steckety or Bryce Street could, in theory, play at Brisbane or Adelaide. And in turn, it means that Mitch Marsh isn't entirely out of calculations, and given he was the player of the World Cup sort of 3 nights ago, it'd be unusual for him to be overlooked entirely. So yeah, I guess they're just about within touching distance, but they play a practice match. Possibles versus probables that used to be called back in the old days. I'm not sure. It'd probably be Australia versus Australia A. Keep it, because Australia and Australia A.
Well, it was the Haddon 12 and the Hick 12 in Southampton. A game that will go down in history. What a time it was, watching that complete dud of a nonsense performance on one of the weirdest pitches I've ever seen. That was about, I don't know, 20 metres away from the boundary on the far side of the field. Anything you chipped to leg as a right-hander was just sailing over the fence. But yeah, you do what you got to do.
It got Cameron Bancroft in the test team, if I recall, making 80-odd on a
not for long.
Tough track. Not for long, just 2 tests and out, as per. So, yes, the Australian squad, as named, Warner, Harris, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Green, Payne, Cummins, Stark, Lyon, Hazelwood. That's what Jeff thinks will be the starting 11. That's how he's written it in our shared document. And then the 4 other players, Khawaja, jumping Jai Richardson in the wickets last week for Western Australia, back in the squad. Michael Neser, Mitch Schwepson, fresh from partying with the T20 squad after being awarded. I like how they get World Cup winning medals even if they haven't played. So Schwepson was part of that, and good on him for it. But one other point here when looking at Richardson and Neser, George Bailey is using the R word, rotation, especially about the big fast bowlers who didn't rotate last year across 4 test matches, but across 5. It looks like it'll be more like 2019 in England than it was 17-18 in Australia when the 4 bowlers took all the wickets, Lyon being the spinner. So it probably means that Richardson and Neser will get opportunities through the series, which I think is a good thing. It made sense in 19. It made sense to me last year when they elected not to do it, and it still makes sense heading into what turns out to be about 5 test matches in 6.5 weeks.
Hashtag Neser must play might at last come to fruition. It also means that James Pattinson probably would have played if he had ruled himself in rather than ruling himself out, but he didn't feel that he'd be right he'd be sort of physically ready to go at that level, I suppose, with all the spotlight and scrutiny of an Ashes series, of which he has played a couple. So at least he doesn't have that sort of end of the career thing that he missed out on that front because he was involved a couple of times.
So Australia's squad is named. England are in quarantine. It's all about the kick-off. It's the Ashes of 2021-22. Jeff and I will be making the Ashes Daily every day through that stretch. It would be remiss of me to say that we've been so bloody busy that we haven't quite got our ducks in a row in terms of commercial partnerships for that as yet. If you want to work with us on the Ashes Daily, and by way of background, those do pretty well. People listen to our daily shows more than they listen to our weekly shows. I don't know why, but they do. Hit us up, finalwordcricket@gmail.com if you want to partner with us, not only on the podcast feed, but on YouTube, where we've had, I guess, the better part of 3 million people visit this year, and we've only just started getting serious there. So send Jeff an email. Jeff will pick it up, and we'll have a look through it and see if you want to be doing what we do through the Ashes. We'll be doing a preview show every test match and one each night of the series. Jeff, let's leave it there. Let's have a brief breather, and we'll return with our feature interview today with Taha Hashim and with Nikesh Ragani.